Part 1. The dance Clara Evelyn Brooks stood at her kitchen window in Cedar Falls, Iowa, watching November rain trace paths down the glass. She was 73 years old, and the house had been quiet for 6 years now since Robert passed. The kind of quiet that settles into the walls and becomes part of the furniture. She held a letter in her hands, not one of Robert's. This one had arrived that morning, forwarded 3 times, the envelope soft with handling. The return address said Portland, Oregon, and the name written there made her hands shake. William Anderson. She had not heard that name spoken aloud in 54 years. Clara set the letter on the counter, unopened, and made herself tea she didn't want. Outside, Mrs. Parker from next door hurried to her car under an umbrella. Normal life continuing normally. Clara wondered what it would be like to be a person who could open a letter from the past without feeling the floor shift beneath her feet. She had met William Anderson in the summer of 1951 at a USO dance in Des Moines. Clara was 19, working at her father's drugstore, saving money for secretarial school. The Korean War had been going for a year, and every weekend the church halls and community centers filled with young men in uniform, desperate to hold something soft and real before shipping out. Clara hadn't wanted to go to the dance. Her best friend Betty had dragged her, insisting that sitting at home reading wouldn't bring adventure to her doorstep. Clara had worn a blue dress with white trim, had let Betty pin her dark hair with borrowed clips that kept slipping. The hall was hot and crowded, thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of punch that had been spiked, despite the chaperone's best efforts. A band played on a small stage, the music almost drowned out by voices and laughter with an edge of desperation to it. These boys were leaving. Everyone knew some wouldn't come back. Clara had been standing near the refreshment table when she saw him. Tall, sandy-haired, with a long face and serious eyes that seemed to be taking everything in. He wasn't dancing or laughing with the other soldiers. He was standing alone by the window, looking out at the street like he was memorizing it. She didn't know what made her walk over. Clara was not a bold girl. She had been raised to be proper, to wait to be approached. But something about his stillness drew her. "You don't like dancing?" she had asked. He had turned, surprised, and for a moment just looked at her. Then he smiled, and it changed his whole face. "I don't know how," he said. "Never learned." "That's all right," Clara heard herself say. "I could show you. If you want." His name was William Anderson, though everyone called him Will. He was 22, from Portland, Oregon. He had worked in his father's hardware store before enlisting. He had a younger sister named Anne who sent him long letters about nothing in particular. He liked books, especially Westerns, though he admitted he'd never been further west than Iowa until the Army sent him to California for training. They danced badly that first night. Will apologized every time he stepped on her toes, which was often. But he held her carefully, like she was something precious, and when he looked at her, he really looked, like he was memorizing her too. At the end of the evening, he asked if he could write to her. His unit was shipping out to San Francisco in 3 days, then on to Korea. Clara said yes. She told herself it was just kindness, something to give a soldier before he went to war. She told herself not to expect anything. Will Anderson wrote to her from the ship crossing the Pacific. He wrote to her from a tent in Pusan, from a muddy camp near the 38th parallel, from places whose names she had to look up in the library atlas. His letters were long and careful, full of small observations, the way morning fog looked over the hills. The Korean children who followed the soldiers, hoping for chocolate, the strange birds he saw, the cold that cut through everything. He never wrote about the fighting directly, but she could read it in what he didn't say. And the way his handwriting changed, became more cramped. In the silences between letters that sometimes stretched for weeks, Clara wrote back faithfully. She told him about the drugstore, about her father's terrible jokes, about Betty's wedding plans. She sent him small things. a packet of seeds from her mother's garden, a photograph of Main Street in winter, a funny comic strip from the newspaper. She did not tell him that she thought about him every day, that she had memorized his letters, could recite passages by heart, that when other boys asked her out, she said no without really knowing why. In April of 1952, Will came home on leave. 2 weeks. They spent every possible moment together. Cedar Falls in spring was beautiful that year. They walked by the river, sat on her parents' porch swing, drove out to the countryside in her father's borrowed Chevrolet. Will was thinner than she remembered, quieter. Sometimes he would stop mid-sentence and just stare at nothing, and she learned not to ask what he was thinking about. On his last night, they sat in that same church hall where they'd met, now empty and dark, except for the light from the street coming through the windows. The dance had been over for hours. The janitor had let them in because he knew Will was shipping back out. "Marry me," Will said. It wasn't a question. It was more like a plea. Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. Yes, she thought, yes, yes, yes. But she heard her father's voice in her head, practical, careful. What kind of life would that be? Waiting for telegrams? What if he doesn't come back? "When you come home," she said instead. "When the war is over, ask me again. Promise you'll say yes." His hands were shaking. "Promise you'll come back to ask?" He kissed her then, and it felt like an answer to a question neither of them had words for. Will shipped back to Korea on April 23rd, 1952. His letters continued. May, June, July. Then they stopped. August passed. September, the leaves turned. Clara went to work every day, came home, checked the mail. Nothing. She wrote to him anyway, even though the letters came back marked return to sender. In October, Betty came to the drugstore, her face careful. She had seen Will's name in the casualty list published in the Des Moines Register. Missing in action. Not dead. Missing. Clara held on to that word like a life raft. Missing meant he could still be found. Missing meant hope. She waited. November came. December. Her parents stopped asking about him. Betty stopped mentioning him. The war went on. In January of 1953, Robert Miller asked Clara to dinner. Robert was a good man, steady, who worked at the bank and went to church on Sundays. Her father approved. Her mother approved. Everyone approved. Missing in action could mean anything. Could mean never. Clara said yes to dinner with Robert, then yes to more dinners. In May, she said yes when he asked her to marry him, because that seemed like what you did when you were 21 and a good man asked you and the person you really loved was missing somewhere on the other side of the world. She had a good marriage with Robert. Not passionate, but comfortable, kind. They raised 3 children together, built a life. She learned to love him in a real way, not the desperate young way she had loved Will, but something solid and true. Her daughter Susan had her laugh. Her son Andrew had her stubbornness. Her youngest James had her love of books. They were her world, but she never forgot William Anderson. Never stopped wondering. And now, 54 years later, he had written to her. Part 2. The letter. Clara finally opened the letter at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep anymore. The handwriting was shaky now, old, but she recognized it. The same careful script that had written to her from across the ocean. Dear Clara, I hope this letter reaches you. I have tried to find you several times over the years, but you moved and Brooks is a common name. Last month, my granddaughter Emily helped me search on the computer, and we found a Claire Brooks who used to live in Cedar Falls. I am taking a chance that you are the same. Clara, I am writing because I am 87 years old and I'm dying. The doctors say perhaps 6 months. I find that I cannot go without telling you what happened. You deserve to know. I have carried this for so long. I was captured in August of 1952 during a night patrol that went wrong. 3 of us were taken to a POW camp in North Korea. I will not describe it. I spent 14 months there. When the armistice was signed in 1953, the camp commanders moved us deeper into the country instead of releasing us. By the time we were finally freed in a prisoner exchange in November of 1953, I had been declared dead. The army made a mistake in the paperwork. My name was listed with the confirmed dead instead of the returned prisoners. By the time it was corrected, I had been home for 2 weeks. I came to Cedar Falls to find you. I took the bus from Portland. I arrived on a Tuesday in December of 1953. I asked for you at the drugstore, and the man there told me you had gotten married the previous May, Mrs. Clara Miller now. He seemed happy to tell me. Said you married a fine man, that you looked beautiful at the wedding. I stood on Main Street in the snow, and I understood. Of course you had married. I had been dead for over a year. Missing was the same as dead when enough time passed. You had done exactly what any reasonable person would do. You had chosen life. I went back to Portland. I married eventually, a woman named Evelyn who was patient with my silences. We had 2 children. Evelyn died 4 years ago. It was a good marriage, and I do not regret it. But I never stopped thinking about you, Clara. I never stopped wondering if you thought of me. I kept all your letters. They are in a box by my bed. When I cannot sleep, I read them. I am not writing to disrupt your life. I looked you up enough to know your husband passed in 2019. I am sorry for your loss. I am only writing because I wanted you to know that I came back, that I tried, that you were not wrong to love me if you did love me. I loved you. I love you still. Some things don't end just because time passes. If you would be willing, I would like very much to speak with you. Just once. I have no expectations. I only want to hear your voice again. My number is below. If you do not call, I will understand. Either way, know that you gave a scared boy something beautiful to hold on to in a dark place. You saved my life in ways you cannot imagine. Yours always, William Anderson. Clara read the letter 3 times. Then she sat at her kitchen table and cried in a way she had not cried in years. Not sad tears exactly. Something more complicated. Grief for time lost. Relief that he had lived. Anger at the universe for the cruel randomness of it. Joy that he had loved her too. She looked up a phone number written at the bottom of the letter, Oregon area code. 7:15 in the morning there. Too early to call. She made coffee instead and watched the sun come up, thinking about alternative lives. The one where the army hadn't made a mistake, where Will had found her before she married Robert. Would she have gone with him? Moved to Portland, had different children, lived a completely different life. She had loved Robert. Their children were her world. She could not regret the life she had lived, but she could mourn the life she hadn't. At 9 o'clock Iowa time, 7 in the morning in Portland, Clara picked up the phone and dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a man's voice, old and rough, but still familiar somehow, said, "Hello." Clara's throat closed. She couldn't speak. "Hello," he said again. "Is someone there?" "Will," she managed. "It's Clara." The silence on the end of the line was so long she thought the connection had dropped. Then she heard him breathe out shaky. "Clara," he said, and it sounded like a prayer. "I didn't think you would call." "I didn't know if I should," she said honestly. "It's been so long." 54 years, he said, give or take. They talked for 2 hours that first time. Carefully at first, like people handling something fragile. He told her about the POW camp in small pieces, the parts he could bear to speak. She told him about her children, about Robert, about the life she had built. They talked about Korea, about Cedar Falls, about all the years in between. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" he asked. Clara thought about it. "I wish you hadn't suffered. I wish the war had never happened." But I cannot wish away my children, and they wouldn't exist if things had been different. Can you understand that? Yes, he said quietly. I feel the same about my son, Mark, and daughter. Evelyn was a good woman. But I think there are different kinds of love, Clara, and the kind I had for you never went away. It just made room for other things. They began to talk regularly after that. Every few days at first, then every day. Long phone conversations that wandered through memory and current events and the small details of daily life. His granddaughter Emily, who was helping him write a memoir. Her son Andrew, who worried about her living alone. The way the light came through the windows in the afternoon. What they were reading. In March, Will said, I would like to see you. Before I can't anymore. Would you be willing? Clara's children thought she was crazy. A man she hadn't seen in 54 years who was dying, wanted to meet, and she was considering flying to Portland. I'm 73 years old, her daughter Susan said gently. I just don't want you to get hurt. But Clara had already made up her mind. Some things you did not get second chances at. This was one. Part 3, Reunion. Portland in April was rainy and green, utterly unlike Iowa. Emily picked Clara up from the airport, a warm woman in her 50s with her grandfather's eyes. He's been nervous all week, Emily said as they drove. Changed his shirt 4 times this morning. I haven't seen him this alert in months. Whatever you were to him, it matters. Will lived in a small assisted living apartment with a view of trees. Emily walked Clara to the door, squeezed her hand, and left them alone. Clara knocked. The door opened. William Anderson was old. That was the first thing she saw. 87 looked different than 22. He was thin, stooped, his sandy hair now white and sparse, but his eyes were the same, serious, careful seeing. Clara, he said. Hello, Will. They stared at each other. Then, simultaneously, they both laughed, the awkwardness breaking. I made coffee, he said. Or there's tea. I wasn't sure what you like now. Coffee is fine. His apartment was neat, sparse. A hospital bed in one room, visible through the doorway. Books everywhere. And on a shelf, a photograph that made Clara's breath catch. Herself at 19 in that blue dress, standing next to a serious young soldier at a USO dance in Iowa, 1951. You kept it, she said. I kept everything. They sat on his small couch, coffee growing cold on the table, and talked the way they had on the phone, but better because they could see each other. His hands shook slightly. She noticed a medical alert bracelet on his wrist, an oxygen tank in the corner he hadn't needed yet, but would. I don't know what to do with this, Clara said finally. All this feeling. It doesn't make sense. You're a stranger now. We're different people. But when I look at you, I see that boy at the dance, and She stopped, surprised to find herself crying. Will reached out, took her hand. His skin was thin and spotted with age, but the way he held her hand was the same, careful, like she was precious. I know, he said. I feel it too. All these years gone, and somehow nothing's changed and everything has. It's not fair, is it? To find each other now when there's so little time? No, Clara said. It's not fair at all. But I'm grateful anyway, Will said, even for this. Even for just a few days. I have spent 54 years wondering if I made you up. If you were as wonderful as I remembered, or if I had turned you into a dream because I needed one. And here you are, real and even better than I remembered. Clara stayed in Portland for a week. Emily had offered her the guest room, but she got a hotel nearby, keeping things proper even though they were both old enough that proper hardly mattered anymore. She visited Will every day. Sometimes Emily was there, sometimes his son Mark, sometimes his grandchildren who called him Grandpa Will, and showed Clara pictures on their phones of things she didn't understand. But mostly it was just the two of them talking. He showed her his life in photographs and stories. Evelyn, who had been an elementary school teacher. His children growing up. Christmases, graduations, ordinary moments that made up a life. He spoke about Evelyn with love and respect, and Clara was grateful for that. Grateful he had been happy. She told him about Robert, about her children, about the pharmacy school her youngest had gone to, about grandchildren and great-grandchildren scattered across 3 states, about the years of ordinary happiness and ordinary struggles that were a life. We had good lives, Will said one afternoon. They were sitting in the small garden area outside his building, watching rain drip from the trees. Different than what might have been, but good. Yes, Clara agreed. Good lives. But I want you to know, he said, turning to look at her directly, that you were the great love of my life, Clara. Evelyn knew. I told her about you early on, and she understood there was a part of my heart that would always be in a church hall in Iowa. She never resented it. But I need you to know, you were the one. Clara felt tears on her face. You were mine too, she whispered. I loved Robert, but you were the one I measured everything else against. He kissed her then. It was nothing like the kiss they had shared 54 years ago in that dark hall. That had been young and desperate and full of promise. This was gentle, slow, full of goodbye, but it was just as real. On her last day, Will gave her a box. The letters you sent me, he said. I want you to have them back. I have them memorized anyway. And there's something else in there, something I wrote during the war. I never sent it because it felt like bad luck, like I was presuming too much. But I want you to have it now. Clara took the box back to Iowa. She didn't open it until she was home, sitting at her kitchen table with tea she actually wanted this time. The letters were there, dozens of them, worn soft from reading, and underneath, a small velvet box. Inside was a ring. Not expensive, just a simple gold band with a small diamond. And a letter dated April 22nd, 1952, the day before he shipped back to Korea. My dearest Clara, I am writing this in my barracks, the night before I leave. I bought this ring yesterday in town with the last of my pay. It is not much, but it is all I can afford. I had planned to ask you to marry me properly, but you said to wait until the war is over. You were right to say it. It is not fair to ask you to promise your life to someone who might not come back. But I want you to know that in my heart, you're already my wife. When I close my eyes, I see our life together. A small house somewhere, maybe Iowa, maybe Oregon, maybe somewhere we haven't even thought of yet. Children, if we are blessed. Growing old together, all the ordinary, beautiful days that make up a life. I will carry you with me wherever this war takes me. You are my home, Clara, my reason to be careful, to stay alive, to come back. If I do not make it back, know that you gave me everything I needed. Your letters, your laughter, the memory of you in that blue dress, it has been enough. You have been enough. But I will come back. I will find you. And when I do, if you will still have me, I will ask you properly. Wait for me. All my love, Will. Clara sat with the ring in her hand, reading and rereading the letter until she had it memorized. 54 years this ring had waited. 54 years he had kept it, through marriage to another woman, through a whole other life, waiting for the right time to give it to her. She slipped it on her finger. It fit perfectly. Part 4. The last months, Will died on a Tuesday in August, 4 months after Clara's visit. Emily called to tell her. Peaceful, she said, in his sleep. He had been reading one of Clara's letters. Clara flew back to Portland for the funeral. She sat in the back of the church, not family, but not quite a stranger either, and listened to people talk about William Anderson. His children spoke about his kindness, his quiet strength, his love of books and terrible puns. His grandchildren talked about fishing trips and life advice. Evelyn's sister mentioned how much Evelyn had loved him, what a good husband he had been. All of it true. All of it only part of the story. After the service, Emily found her. "He wanted you to have this," she said, handing Clara a notebook. "He finished it last month. Wrote it all out by hand because he said typing on a computer made it feel less real. It was his memoir. Not a long one, just 100 pages or so. The story of the war, the capture, the camp, the years after. And woven through it, Clara, letters from a girl in Iowa that kept him alive. The promise of a future that kept him sane. The great love he had lost and never forgotten." On the last page, he had written, "If you are reading this, Clara, then I am gone. I hope I got the chance to say goodbye properly. I hope you know what you meant to me, not just the girl you were, but the woman you became. The strength it took to choose life when I did not come back. The grace it took to let me go and build something good anyway. The courage it took to let me back in, even for a little while, at the end. Thank you for the dance. Thank you for the letters. Thank you for loving me when we were young. Thank you for loving me again when we were old. Thank you for everything in between and beyond. I will look for you on the other side. Maybe we will get it right there. Maybe we'll have all the time we missed. Or maybe this was exactly right as it was, and we were never meant for more than what we had. Either way, it was enough. You were always enough. Wait for me." Clara read it sitting in her hotel room, crying in a way that felt clean somehow. The grief. The grief of something fully lived and properly mourned. She wore his ring on a chain around her neck. Not to replace Robert's ring, which she still wore on her left hand. Both were true. Both were real. Love was not a zero-sum game. Back in Cedar Falls, life continued. Her children worried less when they saw she was all right. More than all right. Somehow lighter. She had lunch with Betty, now also widowed, and told her the whole story. "All these years," Betty said, shaking her head. "And he never forgot you." "No," Clara said. "He never did." "Do you regret it, not waiting?" Clara thought about it, really thought. "No," she said finally. "I regret the war. I regret the cruelty of timing, but I don't regret the life I lived. And I don't regret finding him again at the end. Some things happen exactly when they are supposed to, even if it feels too late." She began to write down her own memories. Not a memoir exactly, but stories for her grandchildren. About the war years, about Will, about Robert, about building a life from hope and necessity and love in all its forms. On quiet evenings, she would sit at her kitchen window and think about Will, not with sadness, but with the kind of grateful wonder. How lucky she had been to be loved like that, twice, by two good men in completely different ways. How lucky they had all been. Part 5. Wait for Me. Clara lived another 12 years after Will died. Good years, full of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Travels to places she had never been. Quiet contentment in her small house in Cedar Falls. She never remarried. When people asked why, she would smile and say she had been fortunate enough to have two great loves in one lifetime. That was more than most people got. She didn't need a third. She kept Will's ring on its chain around her neck. She kept Robert's ring on her finger. Both belonged there. In the spring before she died, one of her great-granddaughters, a college student studying history, asked to interview her for a project about the Korean War. They sat on the porch, and Clara told her the whole story. About the dance, the letters, the waiting, the marriage to Robert, the reunion with Will at the end. "That's the saddest thing I ever heard," the girl said, tears in her eyes. Clara shook her head. "No, sweetheart, it's not sad. It's just life, real life. We don't always get what we want when we want it. Sometimes we lose people. Sometimes we find them again. Sometimes love looks different than we expected. But it's still love, and that's never sad. But you lost so much time together." "We did," Clara agreed. "But we had what we had. And what we had was real. The letters were real. The dance was real. That week in Portland was real." All the years in between when we each built good lives, those were real too. Love doesn't stop being love just because circumstances change. The girl was quiet for a moment. Then, which one did you love more, Will or your husband? Clara smiled. That's like asking which of your arms you need more. They were different. I loved Robert for 37 years of daily life, of raising children, of shared history and comfortable companionship. I loved Will for 2 months in person and 54 years in memory and 4 months at the end. Both were real. Both were necessary. I am who I am because of both of them. Do you think you'll see them again? After? I don't know, Clara said honestly. I would like to think so, but even if not, I'm grateful. I got to love and be loved. That's more than enough for one lifetime. Clara died quietly in her sleep on a Sunday morning in October at the age of 85. Her children found her in her bed, peaceful, wearing both rings. On her nightstand was the notebook Will had written, open to the last page. Wait for me. At her funeral, her youngest son James spoke about his mother's grace, her strength, her capacity to love fully even after loss. Her daughter Susan told stories about her laugh, her terrible cooking, her fierce protection of her children and grandchildren. And Emily Anderson, now in her 70s, flew in from Portland. She stood at the reception afterward and told Clara's family about the last great love of her grandfather's life. About a girl in a blue dress who wrote letters to a scared boy in a war zone. About finding each other again at the end, when it was almost too late, but somehow exactly on time. My grandfather died happy, Emily said, because of your mother. She gave him that gift, and he gave it back to her. I wanted you to know that. Susan cried and hugged this stranger who was connected to her mother through threads of a story she was only now fully understanding. That night, Clara's children went through her things. They found the letters, hers and Will's both, the photographs, the memoir, the ring on its chain. James held it up to the light. I never knew, he said quietly. All these years, and I never knew she had this whole other love. She had both, Susan said. She loved Dad completely, but she loved Will too. Both were true. How? James asked. How do you love two people like that? Susan thought about their mother, about her strength and her softness, about the way she had built a good life from grief and possibility. I think real love makes room, she said. It doesn't subtract, it adds. Mom understood that. She loved Dad with all her heart, and she never stopped loving Will either. And somehow both were exactly right. They decided to bury the chain with the ring with their mother. Robert's ring stayed on her finger. Both belonged with her. Both had been her truth. In Portland, Emily Anderson placed a photograph on her grandfather's grave. A young woman in a blue dress, 19 years old and smiling, standing next to a serious young soldier at a USO dance in Iowa, 1951. Together even when they were apart. Apart even when they were together. And in the end, maybe that had been the whole point. Not the time they lost, but the love that endured anyway. Love that waited. Love that remembered. Love that made room for a life as it was, not just as it might have been. Love that said, even across decades and distance and different lives entirely, wait for me. I'm coming. I'm here. We had this. And it was enough.